You're watching Black the Vote Digital Housing Forum. My name is Katrina Holland, Executive Director of Community Alliance of Tenants.
And I'm Hannah Holloway, Policy Staff with the Urban League of Portland.
So as you know, there is a lot wrapped up in this November's election. Our values as Oregonians are on the ballot. The housing crisis continues to crumble our communities. And so a group of us Black-led organizations came together to have some real talk with candidates and with people in the know about some of the issues on the ballot. Issues like Black houselessness, issues like access to home ownership, renters, luxury units that are vacant while homeless people are sleeping on the streets. And so we really wanted a chance to dive in and ask some really tough questions. We hope that you'll learn a lot.
Also, a quick note, we as nonprofits take our C3 statuses very seriously. In that effort, we made every attempt to get all candidates to this forum. We made repeated phone calls, emails, moved our schedules and our formatting around in an effort to get everyone here. So the candidates that you will hear from are the candidates who were able to make time for this Black Housing Forum.
We hope that you enjoy. Feel free to share it, send it to your friends, send it to your family, ask tough questions, and make sure that you get out your vote on November 6th. Welcome, Eddy.
Hi.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Feel free to introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me and for doing this.
Of course.
My name is Eddy Morales, and I'm a candidate for Gresham City Council, position number 2, and also the founder of East County Rising, an organization working to improve the lives of people in East County.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm really excited to have this discussion. As you know, Black access to home ownership, Black access to housing in the rental market, Black homelessness is a really, really big issue, especially out in Gresham as folks have been displaced from Portland to Gresham. So today we're just going to ask a few questions to talk about the Fair Housing Act, a little bit about the Gresham Housing Task Force that I know we've chatted a little bit about, houselessness and displacement and how the city of Gresham can deal with that from your perspective as a candidate.
Great.
So the first question is, given that the Fair Housing Act has now been weaponized against Black communities and the Equal Protection Clause hinders race-explicit policy, how will you create policies that directly redress disinvestment and exploitation of Black communities for centuries?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I push back regularly on this equity conversation because I actually think the word that we need to be using is justice. And justice for the amount of time that has gone by with certain communities not even being able to participate. So there's a makeup of time that needs to happen. And to me, equity sometimes doesn't account for that. And so I think we should be talking about racial justice explicitly and the fact that policies have been created, implemented, and carried out to particularly displace and affect communities of color. And I think the Black community in particular. And so I believe that in our city, in all of the budgeting that we do and the policies that we do, that we have to be really explicit and center our work around how it's going to affect the most impacted communities and the most disenfranchised. And to me, that is centering around actually Black women and the impact that all policies and budgets have on Black women and poor Black women. And so I would want to make sure that we start the conversation there, that we center Black women at the solution. And so that has to be taken into account in the way that we handle the affordable housing bond, budgeting. And just yesterday, we were having a conversation in our city with our neighborhood associations when we're critiquing the budget. And I said, when we allocate $1 million for roads, everyone agrees in the city that the roads and sidewalks and safety is a problem. So there's broad support for it. And then we went to go allocate those dollars and start addressing streets. There wasn't a filter there that said, let's address the streets that needed the most or the communities that needed the most. And so what happened was some of the more affluent, middle class, upper class neighborhoods got their roads repaved and their potholes fixed.
Yeah.
Yet in some of the poorest communities and where communities of color and black communities live, we still have children being hit because there's no sidewalks, there's no roads, there's no public transportation, kids can't get to school. And so that hook on the back end that really ensures that the money is going to the most needed communities is so important.
Yeah.
And so I'm committed to making sure that not just on housing, but on every policy and budgeting that we're building that into it.
Thank you. Thanks for that answer. So you know that there's been a lot of debate in the last several years around evictions, particularly no-cause evictions, and the disproportionate impact that happens to communities of color, especially black communities, who are targeted for removal in some areas that may be undergoing some sort of change or investment or market speculation. There's some talk about fixing that with a just cause standard. Would you support a statewide just cause standard for evictions?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
without a doubt. I know that when you start layering racial bias and racism and classism and sexism on top of policies that already make it easy to target communities, it is black communities and black women who are leaders of their household who are affected by that, right? And because we haven't solved for racism and we haven't solved for sexism, we need to put the policies in place to really make up for that. And so I think having a transparent and accountable process that people have to follow, both as a landlord and as a renter, to handle grievances is fair. And it's fair for both people. So yeah, I would definitely support.
Thank you. Thank you. So we also know that rents are ridiculous in Oregon. They're rising really, really fast in the city of Gresham, and we've known that for a long time. It's at the forefront of public discussion, opinion. A proposal for the upcoming legislative session includes statewide rent stabilization policy that limits the frequency and amounts of rent increases. Would you support that?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
What do you see that needs to happen in order for you to champion that kind of proposal if, say, for example, the state says, okay, we're not going to implement full rent stabilization, but we're just going to let cities do what they want? What do you see needs to happen if the city of Gresham is forced with that question?
I think we need to be building momentum for statewide policy and federal policy, and it all starts at the city and municipal level.
Yeah.
And so we can't afford to wait for a federal or state to always fix things. One of our jobs as a city is to protect and ensure that we're creating the atmosphere for our people to succeed. And I do believe that we need to come up with a solution around the rent increases. Cost of living in Gresham and across the state is going up, while incomes across the state and in the city have remained stagnant. And it is creating a really big vulnerability in our community where daily people are being priced out of their homes, having to move back with family or go to the streets. Part of why I decided to run was my librarian, who is a Gresham County Library, worked there, was homeless for 3 months because her rent increased 300% over a month. And so even our county employees no one can keep up with this type of growth. And so I think we have to tackle this problem in our community to ensure that we are increasing household incomes, but also keeping things livable. And so it's a combination of both. And I think a lot of times we tackle problems in isolation and not at the intersection. So we double down on more police because we want to tackle crime. But we never think about the fact that if we create more stability in people's living conditions, that there's a set of contracts and standards that get developed when people feel like they own a community that solves for that, right? Or we think that we just need to increase the minimum wage and that solves for people being able to afford it, but then don't solve for housing. And so I think we need a comprehensive approach, but I do believe that one of those things is standardizing rent control. So.
Awesome. Thank you. So Black houselessness often looks like people doubling up with family members, as you mentioned earlier. What actions will you take to surpass the challenges of serving an unseen and undercounted population in order to serve and solve Black houselessness?
Yeah. So one is to first acknowledge that we don't have the answer yet.
Yeah.
And that that our communities are networked differently, and information passes differently in different communities. And so I would work with community groups that are already in relationship and advocating for the Black community, to understand how we capture some of the information. Like I said at the beginning, we got to center Black people in the solution of this. And so too many times what I see is people solving for problems and never including the community that they're solving for.
Yeah.
I think we did that with in Gresham around the homeless situation. You had a bunch of people who were in homes and maybe had not been homeless before, solving for it, and we came up with some policies that didn't really get to the root problem or didn't really meet the needs of the homeless community. And so one is, finding the right partners in the community to engage and get the feedback, but then at the same time, figuring out how we get Black voices at the table as we come up with the solutions.
Great. Thank you.
It sounds simplistic, but I think
Yeah. We'll get there.
that's what we got to do.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there. So, as we've talked about a little bit earlier, many families have been displaced from Portland into Gresham. A common phrase we hear is north to the numbers. Recent data show that disparities between Black and white families continues to widen. At the same time, many of your potential colleagues on City Council have been against further development of affordable housing and addressing out-of-control rent increases and evictions. In your position, if you were elected, what do you plan to do to change that atmosphere? And would you consider similar protections to those that Portland has enacted?
Yeah. So I'm actually very excited about the affordable housing bond and the fact that we're talking about $650+ million coming to the region. My question has been to that bond, and like I said earlier, is how do we ensure that money is going to the communities that need it most and is solving for racial discrepancies, gender discrepancies, and so that it's not just blanketly putting out housing. I think there's been an overemphasis on luxury homes with the hopes that we're attracting more upper income, middle income families to Gresham. And the reality is, 1 in 5 people in Gresham are living under poverty. 20%, it's one of the highest in the region. And our growth is like 40,000 households a year, right, into this area. And so, and like I mentioned earlier, cost of living increasing, stagnant incomes. At the same time, there's an opportunity to build different types of housing for different types of people. And we're seeing a shortage in workers for trades. And so as we're developing or going back and restoring homes that will provide more affordable housing options, there's also the opportunity to get people into better paid union jobs. And so I'm seeing this again as a holistic approach and an opportunity to create jobs in Gresham, to bring trade jobs there that are union, better paid, that you can actually raise a family with, as we're creating the affordable housing for a wider range of people, and actually the people who will live in Gresham, right?
Right.
And so.
Okay. So a little bit back to the housing task force. So in April, it was created in response to Gresham residents demanding that City Council take action against unjust evictions and rent increases. It seems there was a specific policy ask, but it seems like a pretty small step to create a housing and homelessness task force in response to that. Knowing that we're in an emergency situation and our communities are hemorrhaging, it feels like small steps aren't enough to address racial injustices, to address people being kicked out on the streets due to evictions and retaliation, discrimination. I think one shelter in Gresham indicated that rent increases and evictions were the primary drivers
Yeah.
of new shelter families. What do you think is a better course of action, though?
Yeah, so it's called the Housing Task Force, and it was supposed to be very action-oriented. You know, it was created in April. It met for the first time in September. And in that amount of time, hundreds of families have gone homeless. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there needs to be a urgency there.
Yeah.
I think that the task force wasn't given a specific set of deliverables and a timeline. You know, when I look at our city council, we have a council member named David Woodmark who is on the board of Home Forward. Mm-hmm. And I would say probably very experienced in housing. Mm-hmm. And we have strong housing advocates who I don't necessarily see being the leaders of that council. Mm-hmm. The person who holds the position that I'm running for now is chairing that. And this is, you know, the same person who chaired the Citizen Involvement Committee that disbanded. And so I worry that type of leadership leading such a critical issue may not get us results and might get us the same results that we got around citizen involvement, mm-hmm. which is to disband that committee. And so I want to see more urgency around some solutions. I want to see stronger engagement of communities. You know, as I'm campaigning, I'm going knocking door to door 5 hours every day. And I'm talking to people who are in mobile homes, trailer parks, apartment complexes, and people are anxious mm-hmm. and not sure what their livelihood's going to be the next month. And people are making compromises between paying rent or paying utility bills or paying medication. And that sense of urgency I'm not seeing on that task force or in that committee. I went and knocked yesterday at this trailer park that is about to be sold to build more affordable housing. And every renter in there was worried about where they were going to end up. Mm. Again, those voices aren't represented on that task force, and that urgency is not being felt. So for these people, in the next 2 months, this property is going to be sold for new development. Mm. They can't afford to wait another 9 months for the committee to meet to try to figure out a small recommendation. And so, and I also don't know that this should just be given to a committee to do. I think the whole council needs to be addressing this as one of the number one issues in our city. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I would like to see more time-bound, action-oriented, and broader discussion around how we do this. Awesome. Another thing observation about the task force is I didn't see any real estate voices on that task force. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, if this is the community that is navigating between lenders, renters, landlords, I feel like they would offer a unique perspective too around what people can afford to rent mm-hmm. and what is available. And so that was a big gap for me when I looked at the task force and didn't realize that there was no one there with that perspective of the market.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, that wraps up all the questions I have. Do you have any wrap up that you want to give?
Yeah, no, I think I covered a lot of this, and I think although our city has grown, our leadership has remained the same, and so the city of Gresham's average age now is 35. We have 37% communities of color living there. And our city council is mostly white, with the exception of one individual. Only 2 women on there. And the average age of our council is 58. And so there's a big discrepancy between who is making decisions and policy for our city and who really lives there. And so part of why I'm running and I'm supporting other young and people of color and women to run is to make sure that we have a more representative government.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate your time today, Eddy. Thank you for your comments and thanks for your answers. Good luck.
Thank you.